Waluigi is the ultimate example of the individual shaped by the signifier. Waluigi is a man seen only in mirror images. Lost in a hall of mirrors, he is a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. You start with Mario, the wholesome, all-Italian plumbing Superman. You reflect him to create Luigi, the same thing, but slightly less. You invert Mario to create Wario, Mario turned septic and libertarian. Then you reflect the inversion in the reflection. You create a being who can only exist in reference to others. Waluigi is the true nowhere man. Without the other characters he reflects, inverts and parodies, he has no reason to exist. Waluigi's identity only comes from who he isn't. Without a wider frame of reference, he is nothing. He is not his own man. In a world where our identities are shaped by our warped relationships to brands and commerce, we are all Waluigi. We, Waluigi, a postmodern analysis of Waluigi by Franck Ribery. This analysis of Waluigi by Ribery is always the first thing that comes to my mind whenever the character is brought up. It's a rawly honest deconstruction of what Waluigi is. He was created simply to be an inversion of others, and Nintendo has never allowed him to be anything more than that. But do things have to be like this for Waluigi? Is it truly impossible for him to break free of the mirror that imprisons his image? After all, Luigi and Wario also originally only existed as extensions of Mario, but over the years they've slowly but surely grown their independence from him. Luigi has his own series of ghost hunting games with a unique style of gameplay and theming that expand on the characteristics that distinguish Luigi from his brother. Wario's feats are even more impressive. He superseded Mario as the playable character in his own platformer series, making it wholly his own. This was then followed by an entirely separate game series, WarioWare, a series that tasks you with beating a succession of fast-paced microgames, a concept so novel that it can't be easily defined by a single genre. Luigi and Wario may never completely be free from Mario, he will always be their origin, but at least they found their own little corners of the universe they can call their own. So, what about Waluigi? Is it really so impossible to imagine he could forge some identity for himself, away from the Mario brothers? Nintendo has never given Waluigi such an opportunity. Even in games where he's played more major roles, Luigi and Wario have always been right there beside him, an ever-present reminder of all he will never be. But what if there was another series that had a character who was similar to Waluigi in concept? A character who started off as the hero's sidekick's evil counterpart. And what if this series took this Waluigi-esque character and actually did try to make them their own independent being, free from those they initially reflected and inverted? This is what brings us to Foop. Foop is a character from The Fairly Odd Parents, a cartoon show that ran from 2001 to 2017 for 10 seasons. If you're wondering how Nickelodeon spread 10 seasons across 16 years, it's because the show had a mid-series cancellation, 3 separate year-long hiatuses, and a couple of 3-year-long seasons that overlapped with each other. Anyway, the last 5 seasons are notable for introducing a new major character to the show in each of their season premieres, with the exception of Season 8. Foop was introduced in the Season 7 premiere, and of the 4 characters, he is the only one not to be a main protagonist of the show, instead being a recurring antagonist. Foop, like Waluigi, is a character who requires several layers of context and familiarity with other pre-existing characters before you can even understand who he is. You have to know Poof, the baby fairy he's an evil counterpart of, and you also have to know Anti-Cosmo and Anti-Wonder, his parents. And in order to know who any of them are, you have to know Cosmo and Wonder, parents of Poof, and the good counterparts of Anti-Cosmo and Anti-Wonder. Yet, despite Foop being a Xerox of a Xerox and his late addition to the show, he somehow managed to retain his position as a major antagonist throughout the series, even appearing in future iterations of The Fairly Odd Parents, such as the live-action movies and the recent reboot. But how exactly did this evil doppelganger baby persist in this long-running series, whilst so many of the more original characters were thrown by the wayside? To figure this out, let's take a look at all of Foop's appearances in the show to see how he was utilised, and if he evolved over time. And of course, to do this, we'll have to go all the way back to the beginning, which for Foop is the episode That Old Black Magic from Season 2. Foop himself wouldn't be born until 7 years later. But That Old Black Magic is the episode where anti-fairies themselves are introduced, and before you can really comprehend the full force of Foop, you need to know what the anti-fairies were before he existed. As you might have guessed, anti-fairies are the anti-versions of fairies. Whereas fairies try to spread joy by making people's wishes come true, the anti-fairy's goal is to spread bad luck and misery to all. Each anti-fairy also has the opposite personality to their fairy counterpart. Wanda is concerned and considerate, so anti-Wanda is a dumb hick. Cosmo is an all-American himbo, so anti-Cosmo is an evil British genius, Tumblr sexy man. As Cosmo and Wanda are the main characters, their counterparts were naturally the main antagonists in the anti-fairy episodes, although mainly it was anti-Cosmo running the show. Despite getting an early season 2 debut, anti-Cosmo and the rest of his kind wouldn't appear again for quite a while, not making a comeback until season 5. This is when the show suddenly became interested in him as a recurring antagonist, as he appears in 2 episodes each for seasons 5, 6 and 7. You could consider this era the anti-fairy renaissance, where anti-Cosmo reigned supreme. But, like every king, anti-Cosmo had an heir lurking in his shadow, vying to take his throne. This is what brings us to the season 7 premiere, Anti-Poof. Despite anti-Cosmo kidnapping Poof at birth, it's not until a whole season later that he starts to question why Poof never got his own anti-fairy. Then, as if by magic, or perhaps anti-magic, Anti-Wanda becomes pregnant at that very moment. This is another way in which the anti-fairies are the fairies' opposites. With fairies, the males are the ones who carry the pregnancy, whilst the anti-fairies are anti-embreg. Every night I lie awake weeping at how the world was robbed of pregnant anti-Cosmo. Foop is distinguished from the rest of the anti-fairies from birth, as instead of being called Anti-Poof, he's called Poof, spelled backwards. What I find funny is that Anti-Cosmo picks the name, and Foop clearly hates it. Yet, despite Foop betraying his father and abandoning him in his own version of hell, Foop still keeps the name he chose. But other than his name, how else is Foop the opposite of Poof? Well, he's square, giving his character design a lot of sharp points to contrast against Poof's soft roundness. It also means that Foop is just inherently funny looking. Poof can only say his own name, whilst Foop is very articulate, speaking with a refined English accent. And, whilst Poof is a genuinely well-behaved good boy, Foop obsesses over death and destruction. Since Poof is a baby, there's a limited amount of distinct character traits he really has, so the writers had the freedom to go in any direction they wanted with Foop's personality, and what they landed on was Stewie Griffin 2.0. The later seasons even gave Foop his own version of Rupert to talk to. Being a Stewie Griffin knockoff isn't Foop's worst offence though, as he also comes across as very similar to his father, both of them being evil, hyper-intelligent British men. Foop even steals Anti-Cosmo's jokes.
Hello, Clarice!
Who's Clarice?
Ah, so sorry. Can't see a thing without my monocle.
Hello, Clarice. I mean, Mother.
They're not exactly the same though. Foop seems to be more extreme and chaotic than his dad, but the two are similar enough that I'm not surprised that the series ended up abandoning Anti-Cosmo in favour of Foop. There are a few future episodes where Foop just fills the role that Anti-Cosmo had. This would also result in Anti-Poof being the only original series episode where Foop and his parents appear together. After this, Anti-Cosmo and Anti-Wanda would go on to appear in just one more Season 7 episode by themselves, before disappearing from the series completely, which is kinda sad considering they just got into their groove of having 2 appearances per season. It does feel like a missed opportunity to never see them act as a family unit again. They could have at least showed up in the latest elementary school episodes to watch Foop in a school play or something, and it's not like bringing them back would have been hard. They have the same voice actors as Cosmo and Wanda. After leaving his parents, Foop arrives on Earth to find Poof, announcing himself to the human race when he does so. Talking to regular humans is something Foop just does throughout the entirety of the show. Obviously, fairies aren't allowed to do this, they have to keep their identities secret or they could lose their godkids. But anti-fairies don't have godkids, so I guess there's nothing at stake for them if they just talk to humans. Also, the later seasons were just way more fast and loose with committing to hiding the fairies anyway. Once Foop finds Poof, the two engage in an epic space battle, where Foop keeps trying to lure Poof into his baby-themed death traps, such as
In the ball pit of doom!
But Foop's downfall is his own hubris, as he is taken down by every evil baby's one weakness, his refusal to take a nap. Honestly, whilst Foop may be an inherently silly concept for a character, I do think this episode is the best introduction he could have possibly gotten. It's got high stakes and Foop is a genuine threat, but there's also a lot of comedy in him being a baby too, which leads to some great gags and a satisfying conclusion that ties back to the baby premise. It leaves me excited to see what future Foop episodes have installed for me. Foop's second appearance would be in the episode Playdate of Doom. I did not enjoy what the second Foop episode had installed for me. I do like the opening of the episode, where Foop inexplicably has all the tools necessary to both escape prison and to trick Wanda into giving him a playdate with Poof. But the rest of the episode is kinda bleh. It's just one of those frustrating kid show plots where the blatantly evil Foop keeps doing bad things and then framing Poof for them, and Cosmo and Wanda are really stupid and gullible, so they just believe Foop even though they have no reason to. And at first I thought, well, Poof can't talk, so I guess that's how Foop is able to get away with this. But no, they understand Poof completely, they just inexplicably don't believe him.
Nonsense, Poof! The playpen is not an interdimensional vortex of doom!
And she's the smart one. To be fair, it does loop around to them being so stupid it kind of becomes funny again, but that's not enough to save the episode. This episode is also guilty of one of my least favourite FOP tropes, where they just come up with like 3 to 5 gags for an episode, and then they just keep repeating those same jokes ad nauseum for the rest of the runtime until they are inevitably run into the ground. And you know, that kinda works for the episodes where the jokes are actually funny, but less so when they aren't. Sorry, that last part wasn't really Foop related, but where else am I going to have the opportunity to complain about this random FOP episode? Anyway, we've had 2 Foop appearances so far, both of which culminated in him and Poof having a deadly playdate together. I guess that's the most you can do with baby beef. So in the next episode we move on from the baby plots, as he and Poof start attending a magical elementary school together, the Spellementary School, although they are still both referred to as babies despite being old enough to attend school. The school is a pretty cool setting, with it being filled with lots of different magical creatures. Poof and Foop are the only fairies there, since there weren't any baby fairies born for 1,000 years before Poof's birth, the last one being born having been Cosmo. That's right, Wanda's a cougar. Although in the latest Elementary School episodes, a lot of the other children sure look like fairies, but I guess they aren't. Despite there being no other fairy students, a lot of the staff seem to be fairies. This includes Poof and Foop's teacher, Miss Powers. She talks to the kids with this patient and affectionate tone, and it makes her a great character foil for the maniacal Foop. She responds to his acts of terror in the same way an adult would scold a misbehaving child. It's great.
Foop, I hope sitting in the corner will teach you it's wrong to conjure up nuclear weapons and aim them at your fellow students during nappy time.
In the episode, Foop becomes jealous of Poof's popularity, trying to outdo him at everything and failing miserably each time. Meanwhile, Poof is just completely over their rivalry and is unfazed by Foop, seemingly having no issues with him. That is, until he is forced to engage in another Star Wars themed fight with Foop to save his classmates from him. The funniest Foop lore this episode gives us is that Foop is ironically the only person who can't understand Poof.
Join me, and together we can rule the school! You know, I can never understand you.
One thing I noticed about these early Foop appearances is that they keep trying to think of running gags for him, and then not sticking to them for more than 2 episodes. In his first 2 appearances he says, "Hello Clarice," as his introduction, and then never says it again. In Playdate of Doom, Foop develops a split personality that then gets really annoying and overplayed in the following Elementary School episode, and is subsequently never mentioned again. All of these dropped gags make it seem like they were struggling to think of an angle with Foop. Or maybe they decided that the Silence of the Lamb references weren't playing as well to their child audience as the Star Wars ones were. One running gag they stick with is that sometimes when Foop is supposed to vocalise, for instance if he's supposed to cry or laugh, instead of doing these things he'll just say the words crying or laughing. I will play some examples now so you understand what I'm talking about. I don't know, I feel like it's the only way you can understand what I mean.
Muffled screams of pain! Cry, cry, yelling and pain sounds! Evil laugh, cackle, guffaw! Oh, hello, little girl.
And this is the one running gag that lasts until his final appearance. The first time he does this in Playdate of Doom, the joke is that he's being insincere in his emotions.
Weep, weep, crying sounds, weep, weep.
Like, he's not genuinely upset by that. But in most future instances, he does this even when he is genuinely experiencing the emotions being expressed. Another recurring thing with Foop is that he usually refers to Cosmo and Wanda as Uncle Cosmo and Auntie Wanda. He's doing it in a menacing way, but it's still kinda cute. Although the way he says auntie makes it sound like he's saying Auntie Wanda, which is a little confusing. Anyway, that's a wrap on everything Foop related in Season 7. Whilst Foop was a recurring character from the get-go, with him having 3 appearances in his debut season, I'd say there was a lot of restraint in how much he was used at first. Like, it's only 3 out of 39 episodes, it's not like he took over the whole show, and all 3 of these appearances keep him as Poof's rival, with no indication that he could be more than that. But then we get to Season 8. When I first saw Foop's list of Season 8 appearances, I thought, oh, he's only in 3 episodes of this season too. I guess he's still getting used somewhat sparingly. What I didn't realise is that Season 8 is only 5 episodes long. So Foop went from being this occasional secondary villain in Season 7 to suddenly being the main antagonist in 60% of Season 8's episodes. That's a pretty big visibility increase. Appropriately, this is also the season where Foop transitions from being a Poof-centric character to more of just a general villain. His first appearance in Love Triangle brings us back to familiar grounds with the second Spellementary School episode in a row. At first, this episode seems like it might give us a new dynamic for the babies, as they actually agree on something for once, with neither of them wanting to perform in the school play. I don't get how they could agree on something if they're supposed to be each other's opposites, but whatever, it'll be interesting to see a friendship form between them. They're getting on so well that Foop can even understand Poof now.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself.
But then any potential camaraderie is thrown out the window when they both fall for the new girl, Goldie Goldenglow. I was also going to comment that 2 opposites being attracted to the same person is weird, but I guess Foop is just destined to marry the anti-version of whoever Poof marries anyway. The plot of this episode is pretty similar to the previous Spellementary School episode, where it's just a series of Foop trying to make Poof look bad with every attempt backfiring. The 2 basically just have this Looney Tune-esque dynamic between them now. As for Goldie herself, there's not much going on with her. She does have a delightful southern accent. And I love her big butterfly wings. No idea what creature she's supposed to be though. Her being triangle-shaped is funny too. I love that all these baby characters are just the same simple shapes that babies themselves would be learning about and playing with. And the fact that her body shape doubles as a love triangle pun is the cherry on top. Other than a cute design, she doesn't have much personality, she's just the love interest / object to be won for this adventure. And she never appears again after this. Maybe the school kicked her out for not wearing the school uniform. But there is another, much more important recurring character who is also introduced in this episode. Sammy Sweet Sparkle. Sammy is another character foil for Foop, with his sickeningly sweet and kind nature juxtaposing against Foop's vileness and cynicism. They already made a point about how cute and kind Poof is in comparison to Foop, and Sammy is just that, but taken to the extreme. Honestly, I feel like the only reason Sammy exists is because Poof can't talk. So far, I think we can group Foop's appearances into 2 distinct stages. Stage 1 is the baby stage, where his first 2 appearances revolved around him being a baby. Stage 2 was the school stage, with the 2 school episodes. And with Foop's next appearance in Timmy's Secret Wish, we see the next phase in his evolution, the independent stage, where he starts to become less of a Poof-centric character and more of a general antagonist. This episode opens with Timmy making his 1 millionth wish. As an aside, I think it's really funny that Hazel, the kid from the reboot, made it to 1 million wishes after only 1 season, while it took Timmy 8 and 50 years, apparently. Anyway, after he makes his 1 millionth wish, it's found that most of them caused mass disaster, and Timmy is put on trial for being the worst god kid ever. And the lawyer for the prosecution is Foop. At first, Foop seems like a really random choice for this role. Timmy has accumulated a lot of magical enemies over the years, and almost any of them feel like they would have made more sense in this lawyer role than Foop, especially since Foop isn't even a Timmy-centric villain in the first place. However, Foop's motivations are tied back to his character pretty well. If Timmy loses, all of his wishes will be undone. And since Poof was actually a wish made by Timmy, this means that Foop can finally eliminate Poof. And when Foop actually succeeds, this of course means he also gets unwished, as he is Poof's anti-fairy. This means he also returns at the episode's climax, where Timmy saves him and Poof from Wish Purgatory. That's another reason why Foop fits as the lawyer. If they had picked a character who wasn't wished up by Timmy, then they wouldn't have been personally affected by the results of the trial. This leads to Foop arguing that Timmy deserves a retrial, expressing genuine remorse for his actions for the first time. Although it's mostly because he's trying to save himself. Whilst Foop's motivations are initially tied to Poof, this episode still feels like Foop's first step to independence from him, with Foop having to face against Timmy and the fairies as a unit, rather than just Poof. This is what brings us to our next episode, When Losers Attack. In this episode, the 4 biggest antagonists of the series form a group called the Losers, whose goal is to destroy Timmy Turner. Now, if you don't already know who these 4 villains are, I want to see if you can guess. Okay, well, you probably know that one of them's Foop. That is who this video is about. And if you have a passing knowledge of FOP, then you should be able to figure out that 2 of the others are Vicky and Mr. Crocker. But who is the 4th biggest villain of the series? Is it Francis, the bully who frequently tormented Timmy throughout the first 5 seasons? Or maybe HB, the villain of the Schools Out and Fairly Odd Baby specials? Or Norm the Genie, the villain of the Fairly Idle special, who also previously teamed up with Crocker? No, it's Dark Laser. Remember him? The Darth Vader parody who was a villain of the week in one season 4 episode and then came back as a secondary antagonist in one season 5 episode? Well, in the post-Poof era, he suddenly became a major recurring antagonist for the last half of the show. I guess he and Foop have that in common. As you can probably tell, I find this to be a bit of a strange lineup for a rogues gallery. I was surprised by Laser, but really it's Foop who sticks out the most here. Unlike the others, he just hasn't had much personal hatred for Timmy before this. I do think Foop prosecuting Timmy in the previous episode does help to set this up, but in that episode it was at least made clear that his motivations were tied to Poof. In this one, Foop just hates Timmy specifically and doesn't even acknowledge Poof. Really, Foop just needs to hate Timmy for this episode, so his goals are more aligned with the rest of the losers. But it makes you question why they didn't just go with a different villain who would have been a more natural fit. Say, I don't know, Anti-Cosmo. Also, even though Vicky is arguably the most iconic villain of the series, she's not even in the group at first. Initially it's just the 3 guys. The 3 of them all actually met for the first time in the previous episode, although I don't think any of them remember the events of Timmy's secret wish, which is understandable. I tried to forget that episode happened too. Of the 3 guys, Foop seems to be the most angry and serious about wanting to get Timmy, being easily annoyed by the others' incompetence and eccentricities. Although once Vicky joins them, she takes over as the fiercest member. This is also the first episode since his debut where Foop is just casually seen around humans. They all seem to view him as a weird baby, and to be fair, none of them actually witnessed him before magic. I didn't really go much into the plot of this episode, but as you'd expect, it's just the group coming up with a series of schemes to kill Timmy. Honestly, Foop probably contributes the least to the team. They do Crocker's plan, Laser's plan, and Vicky's plan, but they never get round to Foop's poisonous spider idea. With that, we've now seen the 3 stages of Foop. But maybe it would be better to view these as categories rather than stages of evolution, because Season 9 gives us a mixture of all 3 of these types of appearances. His first Season 9 role is in The Terrible Twosome. This episode really goes back to basics, not only being a Poof-centric role, but also having a baby-specific premise too. In this episode, Poof goes for the Terrible Twos, and Foop exploits this to convince Poof to do evil things, which mostly involve torturing Crocker. Damn, Foop has no loyalty. It's pretty fun finally seeing Poof and Foop team up after all this time, and it's actually Foop turning Poof to his side. I thought it would have been the other way around. But of course, as Poof's anti-fairy, Foop starts going through the terrific twos, foiling his plans to fully take advantage of Poof. You know, after the Playdate of Doom episode, I didn't think there was much more they could get out of the evil baby premise. A thought that was backed up by them moving away from it in the following episodes, but this episode was pretty fun. It even had a decent poop joke.
Think of it. Poof and Foop. Together we'll make Poof! Poof, poof. You're right, I heard it when I said it. We'll pick this up in a few hours when I come out the other end. We may have to call ourselves Poof again!
Foop's next appearance in Scary God Couple falls into the independence category, with him acting more as a general antagonist again. This episode introduces the Anti-Fairy Council, who are essentially Foop's bosses. They're most notable for being the only other anti-fairies in the later seasons who actually have lines. They're also seen with different designs throughout the show, sometimes with their faces showing, sometimes cloaked and covered in shadow. There's also this weird era in Man's Worst Friend, where they just have the crowns and skin tones of regular fairies. This episode starts with them giving Foop his own scary godchild, which is a concept I'm gonna have to take a second to unpack. Most other episodes of FOP, both before and after this one, establish that anti-fairies are not allowed to have their own godchildren. So a scary godchild seems to be a concept that is unique to this episode specifically. A scary godparent is given to anyone who is considered to be a particularly vile or evil person. So I guess if you want to have your own magical fairy who will grant any of your wishes for you, you have two options. You can either A, lead a life so sad and miserable that having a fairy is literally the only thing that makes life bearable, or B, just be a huge asshole. Foop's assigned scary godchild is Vicky, who he remembers from when they met in When Losers Attack. In that episode, Foop was simultaneously terrified and impressed by Vicky's ferociousness, but in this episode, he's just terrified of her. Foop actually being disturbed by Vicky makes this one of his more mellowed out appearances, being creeped out by the bats in her room and commenting that she has issues after granting her torturous wishes. To be honest, I don't think this attitude fits Foop, when his entire character up until this point has been wanting to cause death and destruction all the time. Like he's saying Vicky has issues wanting to torture children, and then in the next episode he wants to throw razor-sharp objects at babies. Vicky is torturing Foop as well, so obviously him hating her because of that makes sense, especially when she gives him the Justin Bieber hairstyle. I would have liked this joke more if it had been about Chip Skylark's hair. But I guess this episode came out after his time.
My name is Princess Vicky! Ooh, like that old Chip Skylark song that I've heard my mom play.
Your mum? God, I'm too old for these children's cartoons. Foop eventually gets out of being Vicky's godparent when he teams up with Timmy against her. This makes the second time Foop has teamed up with our heroes, but again it was for self-interested reasons. Speaking of teaming up, in Foop's next appearance in 2.5 Babies, he's forced to team up with Poof on a school project, where the two of them have to co-parent an egg. Unlike the South Park episode, Fairly Odd Parents doesn't discuss the political tensions around two males raising an egg together. This episode really made me appreciate the dichotomy of Poof going to school with his mortal enemy, and having to set aside all the times he tried to kill him so they can focus on completing a school project. Foop's next appearance is in School of Croc, another Spellementary themed episode. This is the first time Foop appears, but isn't the main villain, instead playing more of a supporting role. Timmy wishes Crocker would get transferred to a new school, which inevitably gets him sent to the Spellementary school. Foop adores their new crazed teacher, not knowing that it's Crocker in disguise, although Crocker doesn't recognise Foop either, so I guess this episode is just ignoring their past interactions anyway. Crocker eventually steals Foop and the rest of the class's magical powers, leaving Poof to save them. This actually causes Foop to have a true change of heart, as he apologises to Poof for all the times he tried to annihilate him. The two aren't friends, but they've at least called a truce now, and this change seemingly sticks. Foop still acts as an antagonist in future episodes, but his ire is never directed at Poof specifically. To be fair, that might just be because Poof and Foop only have 2 more episodes where they appear together. Maybe if they had had more, they would have gone back to fighting. But as is, this episode draws the Poof and Foop rivalry to a close. But being Poof's enemy was Foop's main defining trait. So how did the series follow up on such a pivotal development? Well, Foop's next appearance is simultaneously his most weird and also his most pointless. The episode, The Fast and the Furious, opens with Cosmo and Wanda's surprise anniversary party, which Foop attends for some reason. And he's just complaining about how boring the party is, and it's like, dude, who even invited you? He's also wearing his school uniform, so I guess this is a reference to him making amends with Poof in his previous appearance. But this brings us to the other weird element of this appearance. Poof isn't even in this episode. Yeah, that's right. Cosmo and Wanda's own son didn't bother showing up to their anniversary party. But thank God Foop is there! So what does Foop actually do in this episode? Well, he attends the party in the opening scene, and then just completely disappears for the rest of the episode. I don't understand what the point of including him was. He did nothing other than make me question why he was there in the first place. Although, it is funny how this is Foop's most minor role so far, yet also an important milestone for him in being his first appearance without Poof. Foop next appears in Fairly Odd Tales, which is an episode that also confuses me, but for different reasons. So this is an anthology episode where Wanda is reading different fairy tales with the FOP cast in place of the fairy tale characters. Foop appears in the latter 2 stories. In the 3 Little Fairies, Foop goes through his furry phase and tries to open a fast food restaurant. And in Snow Wanda and the 7 Fairies, he plays Meanie, one of the 7 fairies Snow Wanda moves in with. So this is pretty bog standard anthology stuff, using the established cast as actors in these different stories that aren't supposed to be canon to the rest of the series. However, they go out of their way to say all these fairy tales actually happened to real fairies. And the fairies in the story are just our main cast, so did all this stuff happen to them? I think the implication is that the fairies in the stories are just meant to be different fairies. Two of the stories give two different accounts of how Wanda and Cosmo met, so they can't both have happened to the same people. But then Sparky specifically says that all the stories have Wanda in them.
Wait, why do we have to read all the stories you're in?
'Cause I have the book!
Which implies that it is just her. At the end of the episode, the real Foop is trying to open the same fast food restaurant the wolf version of him was trying to open. So, are they one and the same? The fan wiki states that the wolf Foop is his ancestor, and that our Foop might be named after him, and then gives an incredibly contrived explanation for how that could be possible. I love when wiki editors just write a bunch of stuff that makes zero sense. Anyway, Foop's final season 9 appearance would be in its finale, Man's Worst Friend. The title of course refers to the dog. Oh my god, the dog. I forgot to introduce the dog! Okay, so Sparky the Fairy Dog was the new addition to the main cast for season 6, introduced in its premiere, yet somehow I've made it all the way to the finale without talking about him. This is because even though Sparky was a major presence this season, he just didn't do as much in the Foop episodes. Like, he wasn't even in 2.5 Babies, and he barely does anything in the Terrible Twosome or School of Croc. Even when Sparky had a bigger role in Scary God Couple, he didn't interact with Foop that much. The most they interacted so far was when Foop destroyed his tennis ball house, and it's debatable if that was even the real Foop. So, what does happen when you mix Sparky with Foop? Well, obviously, you get Anti-Sparky! Hey, if you're going to open the season with Sparky, you may as well close it out with his evil doppelganger. Foop meets him at an evil pet shop, and makes a remark about how Anti-Sparky's name is uncreative.
Wait a minute! This must be the Anti-Sparky. What do you call him?
We call him Anti-Sparky.
Not very creative.
Okay, and what would you have called him? You're crass? Now, you might think I'd also complain about how unoriginal a concept Anti-Sparky is, but the thing is, I love Anti-Sparky's voice. Instead of having the same posh accents the other English characters have, he has a Cockney accent, and it sounds so funny. I love listening to it.
I'd like to have you for dinner. You got it, Poop. How to take care of you.
I'll get that mutt and that little baby Poof too. Foop and Anti-Sparky team up to get rid of Sparky and make the Turner's life miserable. The two have a pretty similar dynamic to the one Foop had with Vicky, with Anti-Sparky's threats causing Foop to cower in fear. They even make similar jokes about not looking them in the eyes.
By the way, do I have something in my eye?
I don't see anything.
You look me in the eye!
Ooh, I like you.
However, even though he's terrified of him, Foop is actually happy to work alongside Anti-Sparky for most of the episode. He does eventually get sick of Anti-Sparky's threats and turns on him, at which point Anti-Sparky eats him. Despite this betrayal, Foop doesn't have a change of heart this time. After Timmy frees Foop from Anti-Sparky, he still wants to destroy him. Luckily, Sparky saves the day at the last second.
Sparky! I thought I'd never see you again.
I wouldn't let that happen, Timmy.
This would be Sparky's final appearance. Since this was Sparky's last episode, this naturally means that Anti-Sparky never appeared again. Well, I say naturally, but Foop kept appearing without Poof, so I guess they could have kept him around. But I have to wonder, if Sparky had remained a character on the show, do you think they would have phased out Foop in favour of Anti-Sparky? I mean, just within this one episode, Anti-Sparky literally eats Foop so he could take over as the main villain. So, when you heard this episode was a Foop and Anti-Sparky team up, you might think they'd be fought by an epic Poof and Sparky team up. But no, Poof is just absent from this episode. Foop has fully entered his independent stage, so much so that Poof doesn't even appear anymore. And this would continue throughout a majority of his season 10 appearances. Foop returns in the very next episode, the season 10 premiere, The Big Fairy Share Scare. It's a relatively small role, where he leads the anti-fairies in a charge against Earth, before being swiftly dealt with. It's a type of role that would have been filled by his father in the earlier seasons. Also, I think this is the first time we even see other anti-fairies since season 7. As I already alluded to, Poof is completely absent again. Even though Poof has been absent before, this one feels more notable since it's a season premiere that's introducing another status quo change for the show, with the new character Chloe. It's basically a statement that this is a new era for the show, and it's one without Poof, for the most part. And even though this could have been used as an opportunity to write out Foop too, they were still adamant about keeping him around. With Poof fully out of the picture, Foop had to fall back on his only other character relationships he had established, by reuniting with the Losers in Return of the Losers. When Timmy is vulnerable, Foop and the Losers come up with a plan to unleash poisonous spiders on him, which is very similar to the plan Foop came up with before, but at least this time they actually got to try it. And that's basically all Foop contributes to this episode. This time round, Crocker is portrayed as the angry, competent one, shouting at the others for getting their lines wrong and getting annoyed at Dark Laser about wanting to date his mum. Maybe I should have made a Dark Laser video instead. After this episode re-establishes Foop, Crocker and Laser as a trio, there are a couple more episodes about their friendship. First there's Clark Laser, a Dark Laser focused episode where he's forbidden from hanging out with the other two. And then there's Crockin' House, a Crocker focused episode where he's forbidden from hanging out with the other two. Sadly, there never was a Foop focused episode where he's forbidden from hanging out with the other two. Notably, before season 10, most of Foop's appearances were in episodes where he played a major role, with The Fast and the Furious being the only exception. But season 10 is fine with just giving Foop minor supporting roles. It's kinda nice that he can show up without having to take over an entire episode, even if the circumstances he's appearing in are kinda weird. Like, why is this anti-fairy just hanging around on Earth so often? This leaves us with just 2 more Foop appearances in the original series. I mentioned earlier that the show wasn't interested in exploring Sparky and Foop as a duo. Well, that is not the case for season 10's new cast member, as both of these appearances are about his relationship with Chloe. I guess with Poof gone, somebody else has to fill the role of Foop's rival. Now, since there's already been an anti-Poof and anti-Sparky, you're probably wondering if there's an anti-Chloe too. And sadly, no, they weren't brave enough to do that. Maybe they realised that trying to do an anti-version of a human would be a step too far. But what we got was the next best thing, as Foop transforms into a bratty middle school girl named Angel, who essentially acts as the anti-Chloe. My one design note is that they should have given Angel a square head. Angel continually tries to ruin Chloe's life by turning everyone against her, so she'll snap. It's kinda like the Chloe version of that Playdate episode. There's even a scene where the protagonist is blatantly framed for something and the other characters are too stupid to realise. And of course this episode ends like all Foop conflicts, with a Star Wars homage. Ultimately, Foop fails at turning Chloe to the dark side, but what if Chloe could make Foop good? This is what brings us to the always infamous Certifiable Super Sitter. This episode is notable for many reasons, one of those being that it marks the grand return of Poof. Although Foop still gets featured in the title card over him, oh, how far Poof has fallen. So the explanation behind Poof's absence is that he's been at Spell Elementary School this whole time. I guess it's a boarding school now? But supposedly Foop has also been at school this whole time too? Does Poof know that Foop has been bunking off to torment his family? Foop has to spend spring break with Poof's family because his parents moved away without telling him again, so that's why we never see them anymore. It's pretty cute that Poof and Foop now have an amicable enough relationship for Poof to invite his former archenemy to his house out of pity. Foop just wants to have some rowdy fun on his spring break, and is annoyed that Wanda keeps harshing his vibe. He's less of a full-on villain this episode, and more like a rebellious kid, who gets back at his authority figures by shoving them into a black hole. Chloe, however, sees past Foop's acting out, believing he is a good kid deep down, and shows him the first piece of affection that he's received since birth, I think. Vicky then shows up to torture him and the rest of the kids. She doesn't seem to recognise Foop this time. I suppose her memory could have been wiped after she lost him as a godparent, although she somehow doesn't recognise who Mr. Turner is either, so maybe it's not worth putting that much thought into. At the climax, Vicky challenges Chloe to a lightsaber battle, but Foop nobly places himself between them in order to protect Chloe. Now, we've had a few instances of Foop having a last-minute heel turn to side with the heroes, but those were always self-motivated in some way. This is the first instance of Foop doing something truly selfless. Or maybe he just didn't like that there was a lightsaber battle going on without him. Foop then ultimately saves the day by calling on a kangaroo to punch Vicky. The kangaroo was a running gag in this episode. I'm not recapping everything for you. Okay, so I don't like this episode that much. It's just a lot of obnoxious shouting. But considering this was Foop's last appearance, I do like where it left his character. After 4 seasons of evil antics, he finally makes a genuine connection with someone who shows him kindness and does an act of good. He and Chloe are even still friends at the end of the episode, making it seem like Foop has turned over a new leaf. I'm sure if the original run had carried on after this, he would have just reverted back to being evil again, but as is, it leaves Foop with a kind of character arc. But Foop's story doesn't end here, as he would go on to appear in the reboot, which I suppose I can move on to now, unless there's something else from this era that I've wiped from my mind. Oh, dear God. You know, I had never watched any of the live-action movies, and I was really hoping that was a claim I could continue to make for the rest of my life. But Foop is in one of these movies, so I have to watch it before I can become a true Foop completionist. You know, the saddest part is that I'm not even a true Foop completionist until I played the surprising number of web games he was in. In the live-action series, Foop only appears in the sequel movie Fairly Odd Summer. I didn't bother watching the other two, but I doubt I'm missing out on much. I think Foop being the main antagonist in one of the sequels is a pretty good indicator of Foop's overall relevance. Like, he's not important enough to appear in the first film, but when there's a sequel, they're happy to resort to him. Foop himself looks amazing. I love that they didn't even attempt to give his clothes a different texture from his body. To be fair, he does look less ugly than the other fairies. Having blue skin is naturally doing him favours. Also, I gotta say, I love the human actors completely failing to make eye contact with the CG characters. In the movie, the Anti-Fairy Council are angry at Foop for not succeeding in his mission to destroy Cosmo, Wonder and Poof, which I don't really get why the Anti-Fairy Council would even be invested in that. I thought that was more of a personal Foop vendetta. Foop suggests a plan to steal the source of all magic, the Abracadabrium, which the Anti-Fairy Council agree with, but they also confiscate Foop's wand for disappointing them, I guess. I don't really understand their logic here. Like, if Foop's mission would be beneficial for all anti-fairies, what's the point in making his mission harder for him? Obviously, plot-wise, this is just done to nerf Foop, but then they add this contrivance that his bottle only contains most of his powers, so he can still teleport and transform whenever it's most convenient to the plot. Speaking of, Foop transforms into some human guy for the middle chunk of the movie. I don't know if this was done to cut down on the CGI, or if they just really wanted to make a Happy Days reference, but the only purpose this human form serves is this one scene where he dresses up in a monkey suit. In this continuity, Foop and Crocker have never met before, but when they do meet, they team up to defeat Timmy, and become instant besties. Love finds a way. Honestly, this movie made me realise that Foop and Crocker feel like a much more natural pairing, without Dark Laser around third wheeling. When it was the three of them together, it just felt like three random characters who had no reason to interact suddenly being made into a thing. But when it's just Crocker and Foop, it's like, oh yeah, a fairy catching expert would team up with an anti-fairy. Foop is once again the more competent and evil of the two. For instance, Foop gives the exposition about how lava can destroy the Abracadabrium, whilst Crocker makes a poop joke. And when Crocker has a change of heart about destroying the Abracadabrium, Foop remains adamantly evil until the very end. I like that you can use these character pairings to measure a respective character's evilness. When with Vicky and Anti-Sparky, Foop is the lesser of two evils, but Foop is a bigger threat than Anti-Cosmo and Crocker for the most part, except for School of Croc, where Crocker is worse. Foop being Poof's counterpart is alluded to throughout the movie. Poof seems to have this sixth sense that can detect when Foop is spying on them, and he does send Foop straight to the moon at the end, but other than those moments, this doesn't really feel like a Poof-centric appearance for Foop. I would place it in the independence category. Overall, I would say Foop's characterization is pretty in line with his TV show portrayal, minus the part where he turns into a random man who doesn't even speak in a British accent. And now that's out of the way, I never have to talk about the live-action movie again. Let's move on to the reboot. To catch you up to speed, adult Poof, who has now changed his name to Perry, has become the godparent to the best reboot character, Dev Dimmadome, grandson of Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and son of Dale Dimmadome, owner of the Dimmadome Glomadome. Yeah, the continuity in the series goes crazy. It even referenced Sparky. Dev gets angry with Perry when he refuses to help him cheat, leading the two to break up. That's when adult Foop sweeps in, offering to take over as Dev's godparent. He says that anti-fairies normally aren't allowed to be godparents, but since Perry abdicated his position, any magical creature is allowed to fill it. I guess scary godkids are no longer a thing, which is a shame because Dev probably would have qualified as one. Because Perry changed his name, Foop now goes by IRAP, a name he hates even more than Foop. And like, dude, is anything actually stopping you from just choosing your own name? Along with a new name, IREP also sports a new adult design. Unlike Perry, who seems to have lost all his baby fat, IREP kept his baby squareness into adulthood, which I'm a fan of since being square was such an iconic aspect of his design. The rest of his body is rectangular too, which is fun. Both Perry and IREP have gotten new wands as well, which is fun. No, sorry. Both Perry and IREP have gotten new wands as well. Perry has a staff with a globe on top, which literally looks like the adult version of his old rattle, and IREP has a mace, which is like the evil inverse of Perry's staff. This is a clever choice to have both their wands reflect each other like that. My only complaint would be that the mace doesn't really work as an evolution of his old bottle. Maybe they could have given him a beer bottle instead or something. Could you imagine? Also interestingly, in the original series, Poof and Foop were the only two fairy counterparts that didn't keep the same voice actor. But now Foop's original VA, Eric Bowser, voices both adult versions. Anyway, Dev uses IREP's rule-breaking wishes to cheat in a rock-paper-scissors tournament, and to give Hazel bad luck. A real throwback to the Anti-Fairy's roots. Dev praises IREP for being way better than Perry, which causes him to tear up. There was this running gag in the original series that Poof just outdid Foop at everything, and would always get praised for it. So it must have been pretty emotional for IREP to finally hear someone praise him over his rival. This all culminates with Dev wishing to straight up murder Cosmo and Wanda, but IREP is taken away from Dev when it turns out Perry never gave in his 2 weeks notice. Before I get to IREP's next appearance, there is one other episode I want to mention. So you remember when I joked about how they weren't brave enough to make an anti-Chloe? Well, the reboot did what the original series was too cowardly to do, and found a way to give Cosmo and Wanda's new god kid Hazel her own anti-fairy counterpart, and her name is...
Lessa!
Lessa. That's almost as bad as when they called the baby Poof. Anyhow, IREP next appears in the season finale, Battle for the Big Wand, where he and Dev have taken over Fairy World together, after Dev built a microchip that took control of the Big Wand's power supply. I was initially surprised that IREP was still taking commands from Dev after the Anti-Fairy seized power, even though it seems like IREP could have easily betrayed him, but I think IREP just genuinely enjoys granting Dev's sociopathic wishes. And the reboot is truly the fan service that keeps on servicing, as it delivers on something else the original series didn't, by reuniting IREP with his parents. Although he doesn't actually interact with either of them in the episode, it's a little disappointing actually. Even though Anti-Cosmo's back, IREP is still the de facto leader of the Anti-Fairies, so I guess he just permanently inherited that role from his father. This is another instance where IREP gets to be the greater of two evils, wanting to luck up all fairies and completely disregards Dev once his dad comes into the picture. But IREP still has his light-hearted moments, like doing a dance number with Dev, or being enthralled by how cool Hazel's non-binary friends' skateboarding tricks are. IREP even uses Wynn's correct pronouns.
Oh no, they're not cool, they're not!
So is he really that bad a guy? IREP's disposal is a little anticlimactic though. He gets trapped in a pile of sticky goop about 3/4 of the way into the episode, and then is just absent for the rest of it. There's no final confrontation with Dev or Perry or anything, he's just gone. The reboot also drops a lot of IREP's old running gags. Obviously they can't do the evil baby jokes anymore, but he also doesn't maniacally shout about death and destruction the way he used to. And he doesn't even do the running gag where he says the words crying or laughing instead of making the sound itself. And like, come on, even the live action movie remembered to do that. It's also notable that IREP has regressed back to being Perry's evil counterpart again, despite them making amends at the end of the original run. I don't really mind this though. I can believe that the two of them just fell out during the time skip. Their truce always seemed pretty tenuous anyway. Also, since this reboot is reintroducing the character to a new audience, it's understandable that they would soft reset his character to what he was originally intended to be. And with this currently being IREP's final appearance, it means he's come full circle in how he's portrayed. Maybe if there's a season 2 of the reboot, IREP will be expanded upon a little more. But, you know, for that to happen, the show would actually have to get renewed first, and we'd also have to hope the staff hasn't died from being unemployed this whole time. Anyways, back to Foop/IREP. It really can't be understated how impressive it is that he made it into all these different iterations of FOP in the first place. The only thing he didn't make it into was that live action show, but I bet he would have if that had gone a second season. Of those 4 characters that were added in the later half of FOP, there is an argument that Foop made it out the best. He witnessed the rise and fall of Sparky and Chloe, and even though Poof probably still is the most iconic of these 4, there was that period of time in season 10 where Foop was more relevant than him. I guess the lesson there is, when it comes to adding new characters to a show, recurring characters who are only seen occasionally when the story requires them are easier to keep around than main characters who you have to try and force into every episode. Despite Foop sticking around longer than anyone would reasonably expect him to, there still feel like a lot of roads not taken. It would have been cool to see more of his family dynamic, but his parents were ignored. It could have been cool to see more of the Poof and Foop frenemy dynamic, but right after they made up, Poof got dumped. If they had at least taken Foop's character in an interesting direction after not pursuing these things, that might have made up for it, but for the most part, a lot of Foop's Season 10 appearances feel minor and inconsequential. The 2 episodes where he feels most important are Blue Angel, in which he is essentially just transformed into a different character, and Certifiable Super Sitter, because that's the episode where Poof comes back. So, does that mean that Foop doesn't work as his own character? Does he always have to be chained to Poof? Is having Foop show up to your party without Poof as weird as Waluigi showing up to a Mario party without Luigi? But I don't think this has to be the case either. I would say that the season that gave the best showcase of Foop was Season 9, where there were still plenty of Poof and Foop episodes, but we also got to see him branch out and play off other unrelated characters as well. There was a good sense of balance there, and maybe that's the best way to handle these types of clone characters. Let them forge their own identity as time goes on, but don't forget their roots. Give Luigi and Wario their own games, but don't take them out of Mario Kart. And if we stick to this philosophy, maybe Waluigi could get his own game too someday. Oh wait, I forgot about Waluigi's taco stand. Well, that's the end of that video. Unless I can think of some stilted skit to tack on at the end of it. Hold it right there, partner. It's my evil anti-self, Cam Cowboots. Look at you, sitting in front of that screen all day, whining about cartoons and video games, wasting the life that God gave you. Well, I'ma put a stop to all that the only way I know how, by taking you out to the library so you can read some classic literature. No! Please! I can't handle adult themes.